After an introduction like that, I'm reminded of the time when a wife and a husband were at a dinner and he got some fulsome introduction like that, and she started dreamily looking off into space, and he leans over and says, "Honey, isn't it wonderful married to someone who can command an introduction like that? Is that what you were thinking?" She looks at him and goes, "No, I was thinking that if I shot you the first time I thought about it, I'd be getting out about now." So you can always rely on your spouse to ground yourself. Well, what I want to talk to you a little bit about today is, being a member of the Military Advisory Board for Climate Security, Energy Security for DoD. We have about 30 generals and admirals that have gotten together and looked at the issue from the DoD perspective. And so the question you'd have to ask is, well, why does DoD care about this? Let me tell you why DoD cares about this. For every $10 change in the cost of oil, a barrel of oil, for example, it's a $1.3 billion change in the budget of DoD. Now, of course, it's been going in the wrong way. There's a windfall waiting for us out here with the oil prices going in the direction. But that instability in the budget is a big deal when you're running a very large budget, because in some cases, as that price goes up, you're not funded for it. Now you've got to steal money. We call that cash flow money from other programs in order to pay your day-to-day bills, and that destabilizes all of your programs. So that becomes a big issue. The next thing is there's an effect on mission effectiveness, because when we're operating, particularly when you're operating in combat, our adversaries know that lifeline to our operating forces are the convoys that carry food and fuel and water. In fact, about every dozen or 14 convoys that we run, we get somebody hurt or killed in that convoy. So every gallon that you can not burn is a gallon you don't have to buy, you don't have to convoy, you don't have to protect, and you don't have to put people in harm's way. Then, of course, there's the basing and training issues. When the president or the governor or someone calls and said, "We need you at point A," we can't really answer, "Well, the grid just went down, and so we're not going to be able to generate the forces, and we're not going to be able to go and do what we need to do." So there's a certain amount of resilience you're trying to build into your operating locations, so in fact you can go and do the things that you need to do. And then, of course, there's the diplomatic impediments. Even today, we're sending about between $100,000 and $200,000 a minute. That's $100,000 to $200,000 a minute overseas to buy oil, even with the prices that they are now. And it used to be a lot more. We still are importing about 33% of the oil that we use. We import a lot more, but then we refine it and send that back. But the net imports, we're about 33% of what we use, we bring in. And now it's going down, but it's still at 33%. So even with the gas prices what they are, if all of a sudden the Straits of Hormuz go down, we're going to see an impact on that. And you're going to see an impact because about 95% of our transportation uses liquid fossil fuel to get from point A to point B. Or, said another way, about 70% of our oil goes to transportation, which means not only will the gas prices go up, but you're not going to get the milk, the bread, the oranges, or whatever it happens to be. So from a military perspective, we see that, and what we're trying to do is, in effect, enclave our bases. We want to make sure that if the grid goes down, if the floods come, if the price spikes, we can in fact operate, because our job is, when called upon, is we go and fight and win America's wars when we're called upon to do so, whether that's humanitarian rescue, whether that's global vigilance, or whether it's actual combat. So we have to be ready. So you may say, "Well, that's all fine, that's what we hired you guys to do, so what does that got to do with me?" Well, it really has a lot to do with you, because when you look at a base or a post or a camp, they're a lot like little villages and cities and towns. And so the same problems that we have in being resilient and being able to operate falls upon all of the communities that we have out here. And as you'll hear later today, when you look at what the Guard has done in Michigan, it's absolutely amazing because they're focusing on their cantonments, if you will, and they're focusing on how do we get ourselves to net zero basing, meaning we generate as much energy as we use, that we don't need more water. We reuse the water that we have. So we get ourselves to a point where we can sustain ourselves and we can do so more efficiently, which then focuses on effectiveness. So I think that's the important thing. And what's important about a group like this is we have got to put the numbers on the table. We can't get into an issue of, is this progressive, is this conservative? No, this is American. This is something that we need to do. We need to make ourselves self-sufficient. The military is taking the approach threefold. One is reduced demand. Again, every gallon you don't use is a gallon you don't have to buy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then diversify supply. So when something is disrupted, you got a backup plan. We in the military are great making backup plans. We got a plan A, and we've got a plan B, and a plan C, and we have metrics that tell us when plan A isn't working in time that we can get to plan B. You want to get that low level light on your fuel gauge when you just pass the last exit on the interstate. So and then we look at the plan and we go, and what if we're wrong? Because no matter how deeply you believe in something, there's always the possibility that you're wrong. And what do the numbers show you? So being able to sit down around the table and rather than just make claims, you got to ask people, where'd that number come from? Where did you get that number? One of the blessings and curses of the world that we live in today is the internet. I can Google anything. But when you Google something, it's like, you know, years, decades before, you read something in the newspaper, it must be true, it's in the newspaper. Well, now we kind of think that maybe it's not true, it's in the newspaper, but if you Google it, it's true. Or if you read it on a blog, it's true. We need to do the same things we do in our private lives, where if we're going to buy a car, we start doing some research. And we don't get research from just one place. And we start to see what kind of good deal is this? And how long is it going to last? And what's the repair cycle on this thing? Well, we need to do the same thing when we start talking about energy and renewable energy. What are the true costs? Because the cost of a solar panel 10 years ago is not the cost of a solar panel now. The efficiency of a wind machine 10 years ago is not the efficiency of a wind machine now. We need to look around and we need to look at the reason that the military has got into this is because we've transplanted ideas that were working from the civilian community onto our bases. Now I think it's time that the civilian community starts looking at, well, what do they know that we don't know? How are they making this operate? Because we all have a budget. I mean, I had a budget in Air Combat Command. And typically I was only funded at 80% of my utilities, but everybody knows you got to pay your utilities. So I had to find efficiency somewhere so I could actually pay my light bill around my bases. So we need to start looking at that. So it's reduced demand and then diversify supply, so you've got a backup. And then it was a matter of changing culture. And the culture is that there's a cost to energy, that energy just isn't there. You just don't plug the stuff in. So the questions you've got to ask is, as you look in your homes, if does my TV draw 20 watts or 10 watts or 15 watts when it's plugged in but it's off? What about all the chargers I have plugged in? Are they drawing electricity? Have I changed out my light bulb from incandescent to CFLs or LEDs or whatever it happens to be? Have I run the numbers on, does it make sense for me to pay $10 for a bulb that I could get for $1 if I don't have to replace that bulb for X number of years? And those are the kind of the things we need to start looking at, because all that does is when we start putting a cost on energy, we start to see ways to save energy. For example, the federal mandate on efficiencies in cars going to 54.5 miles per gallon down the road. That's going to save us almost half the oil that we currently buy from OPEC. That's a good deal. That's going to be a good deal, because that puts us in a position where diplomatically we have more choices. In a number of cases around the world, politically, diplomatically, we probably couldn't do the thing that we wanted to do because we're worried about someone getting mad at us and then maybe tightening down the spigot of oil. that spikes the price of gas and oil and all the other things we make from oil, which then has a direct impact on our economy. In fact, if you go back in history and look at most of the recessions we've had, they've all been predated by some sort of energy shock. That started the ball rolling. So that's what we're looking at, and that's what we're talking about today, is what's the right policy? And all of the above, frankly, is not the right policy, because you can't do all of the above today and do it in a financially responsible way. It's all of the above, whether it's geothermal or whether it's solar, wind, refuse to fuel, methane from dumps, all of those things. But you've got to cycle them in where they make financial sense. I was up in Iowa not long ago. They're getting somewhere towards 40% of their electricity from wind energy. So somehow, despite what naysayers say, it's working up there. Because if they're getting that much electricity in Iowa, somebody's making money somewhere. And then you'll have a discussion about, well, what about, the only reason that's working is because of subsidies. And then the question is, what's the difference between a tax break and a subsidy? And you look at oil and you have depletion allowances for oil. But a depletion allowance, some people say that's a subsidy, and other people say, well, that's a tax break. And you go, well, do we want to give companies tax breaks that are developing things for us? Then there's a question about, well, how many people are in this renewable energy job market? How many of these people, how many jobs did it really make? And the question is, well, how many is enough? How much does it cost to generate the job, and how many jobs generated makes it worthwhile? So those are the kind of questions that you have to sit around a table, and you have to not just talk with each other. You got to talk with the people that are on the other side of the issue and say, well, explain this to me, because I'm a fairly reasonable and intelligent person, and I'd like to understand. It's when I go on the road and talk about climate change is a real touchy subject for some people. But when I look around the military, and we've done a survey, and there are 30 of our bases that are currently in danger from sea level rise. We see the water over the last 5 years has risen more than it rose over the last 15 years, and it doesn't have to rise enough to cover the entire base. All it has to do is get a couple, 3 inches, and you get a big nor'easter coming through, and that makes a big difference. So, but when we talk about that to people, they go, I don't know if I believe the models, etc. You go, well, but you got to believe the numbers. Here's what the numbers. We took a stick and we stick it in the dike there at Langley, and that water just keeps. All of you who lived on a farm near a river, you probably remember doing that, putting a stick in the ground and watching it rise, and how fast is it rising. So I think those are the kind of questions that we have to ask. And then the question is, you know, in the military, we always make a decision before we have 100% clarity. Because if you wait until you have 100%, it's too late. Something's already happened. So we start looking at how bad could it be? Could I stand that? If I can't stand it, what could I do to get it back to the point that I can stand it? And how much will that cost? And can I afford that? And if I can't afford that, can I do something else? If not, I'll just have to grit my teeth. And so those are the kind of discussions that I think would be very useful, because when you're talking about energy policy, those are hard choices, but they've got to be economic choices, and I think they have to be local. As I've gone around the United States, and I've been to about 15 different states as I've started doing this, the things that are most successful are the things that are done locally. They are the mayors that stood up and said, you know, we need to make sure that our city is going to operate more efficiently because it makes sense for the people that live here. It's going to save them money. They're going to get to work quicker. They're going to have a more healthy lifestyle, whatever it happens to be, and it works for them. Not some mandate that says, okay, one size fits all, so I want all of you to do this. And I think you'll see this in the discussion from the National Guard. There are some places in the National Guard where you have a small armory somewhere in a city. It's going to be almost impossible to get them to net zero. But at other places, it will be a lot more doable to get them to net zero and beyond, so that you may be able to take energy credits here and cover the energy requirements over here. That's the kind of thinking that we have to have. Now, I don't know whether many of you have read the book Moneyball. It's if there's any baseball enthusiasts here, but it was about the fact that the Oakland Athletics, which were the poorest team in baseball, at a point where Billy Beane took over as the manager, and he started doing analysis on things that happened in baseball. Of course, as you know, baseball is just a really statistic-rich sport. He started looking at what they were paying money for, and he found out that foot speed really didn't mean anything. So how fast someone could run didn't mean anything in the number of runs that he actually generated. That hitting percentage didn't necessarily tell you how many runs you were going to score. It was on base percentage and all. And so he started to look at the conventional wisdom and put numbers to it. And he found out when he put numbers to the conventional wisdom that you couldn't prove what you thought, that what you thought wasn't correct. And I think those are the hard questions we've got to look at and say, why is that? How does that work? Show me the numbers on that to get to the right place. And we have to look at not just, when we talk about energy efficiency, we tend to think about the things that generate electricity or energy. But there are a lot of other things. For example, in the military, we've gone to what we call right sizing, right powering our fleet. You get on a Air Force base, and you don't need Ford F-150 trucks to do everything. If you're carrying little parts to an airplane, you could do that with a golf cart. And it turns out it's much more efficient if you have a dozen golf carts to go back and forth from the parts store to your airplanes. Then there are certain things you're going to need a truck. And then if you've got sedans, you're better off with hybrids, moving people around in hybrids. And then, of course, if you're going to move a lot of dirt, you're going to have a big diesel thing, and it's going to burn diesel. So right sizing and right powering of the fleet, that was one of the things. The Navy, for example, burns a lot of fuel. I don't know how many Navy folks we have out here, but if you've been on a ship, you know you spend a lot of time just, as we call this in the Air Force, stooging around. You know, you're not going real fast, you're just hanging around waiting for something to happen. But if you've got this huge turbine that's burning a lot of fuel, even if you're only going at 7 knots, they figured out, of course, a turbine running faster is more efficient. So they put a smaller turbine on the deck, which runs fast, charges a battery, and effectively they drive the ship with a bass boat electric drive. It's a little more sophisticated than that, but and then when they need to go to combat speed, then they can fire up the main turbine. That made a big difference. For all of us who are sport boaters, we generally have stern flaps on our boats. Well, they put stern flaps on their ships, which then allows them to get on the step quicker, and they save fuel. So it's a matter of looking at things that aren't, you wouldn't say, well, this is directly an energy kind of thing. It's like painting the hulls of a ship. They've always been interested in anti-fouling paint so that you don't have all the crustaceans build up on your ship's hull. But then they said, while we're doing this, can you make us a paint that is really slick so it reduces the drag? They did that. In the Air Force, in our airlift community, typically when you come to the filling station, you say, fill it up. But we started talking with FedEx and UPS, and they said, no, 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 you don't want to do that. We got a software here that tells you how much gas you should put on board to fly the distance you want to fly with the load that you have, and still have the amount of emergency fuel that if you have to divert, because otherwise you're burning fuel to carry fuel. That's not efficient. So again, it's a different way of looking at things. And I think that's an important thing that we have started looking at in the military. Simple things from just putting a meter on all of our buildings. Because typically a lot of the posts and places like that, you know, it's like one big honking meter, and that's your electric bill. Well, then I don't know how much each of my rooms or each of my facilities are using in energy. So I don't know where to spend the next dollar in making myself more efficient. So that's my pitch. You know, this is important. This is really the future of our country. We have got to figure out, I believe, that how do we make ourselves more efficient in energy? How do we make ourselves self-sufficient in energy? And oh, by the way, we need to start focus on what do we spew out in the air while we're making that energy, using that energy. It's an important quest, and it's not, again, it is not about being progressive, and it's not about being conservative. It's about it being efficient and being effective and financially viable. So I look forward to the rest of the discussions we have today. This is a great opportunity. Don't pass it by. Talk to people. And then when we leave, I'm sure there are people who are on the other side of the issue that maybe are not here. We need to corner them. We need to get them to prove their point. I often said with the climate change, when I talk to folks and they go, I just am not buying that. I said, well, sit down with me and convince me that it's not happening. Because if it's not happening, I'm going to kick back, have a beer, smoke a Lucky, and relax. You know, I don't need to go around worrying about this if it's not a problem. So that's what we need to work through. So thank you very much for listening.